The G20 summit has agreed on a joint declaration, including a statement on the Russian attack on Ukraine. A BBC correspondent says it's been substantially watered down, though, from the one that was issued last year. Now, the statement calls on all states to refrain from the threat or use of force, but it doesn't mention Russian aggression. Kyiv has responded, describing the G20 statement as nothing to be proud of. Now, the term war against Ukraine has also been changed to a more neutral war in Ukraine. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi also proposed including the African Union as a permanent member of the bloc, part of his drive to include more of the voices of the global south at the top table of international diplomacy. Now, prior to this, it was only South Africa that was the continent's only member. Mr Modi also found time to pose for a bilateral photo call with the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, with a post-Brexit trade deal on the cards. This is what Mr Sunak had to say about the deal.
Prime Minister Modi and I had a very warm and productive discussion on a range of different things. With regard to the trade deal, there's a desire on both of our parts to see a successful trade deal concluded. The opportunities are there for both countries, but there is a lot of hard work that's still to go, and we need to work through that, as we will do. But I think there's also opportunities for us to deepen our relationship in lots of different areas, and he and I talked about that as well, whether it's in defence and security, in education, research, all sorts of things that we could do more together. And it's important that we do. India, as this G20 is showing, is going to be one of the most important geopolitical actors over the next years and decades. It's important for the UK to have a close relationship with India. And as I said, Prime Minister Modi and I talked about all the different ways in which we can strengthen and deepen that partnership.
That was the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. We can speak now to Fulani Mthembu, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Global Dialogue, a foreign policy think tank in South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us. In terms of what this means for the continent of Africa, given that Mr Modi is very keen to include the African Union in, how do you feel about this? How do you think people are going to react to this statement?
I think it's a welcome initiative. I mean, this is something that has been initiated from within the African continent, and I think certainly India supported that initiative alongside other members of the G20. It will enhance the continent's voice, but it will also enhance the continent's ability to coordinate on its international partnerships, while also putting development issues back on the center, I think, of G20 deliberations. So it's quite an important initiative for the continent.
And when you say development issues, what will they be? What is the important issues that countries in Africa will want to highlight to the rest of the G20?
I think whether you're speaking about climate issues, so there you're definitely talking about climate finance and sustainable finance to the continent. You're definitely talking about a changing international development finance landscape where the continent has been consistently pushing other parts of the world to provide finance at a concessional rate for the continent. But you're also talking about sustainable infrastructure projects, cross-border infrastructure that enhances the continent's ability to trade amongst itself. And so these are quite important issues that should be at the center of the G20. I mean, we, in the last few years to the Agenda 2030, the UN's agenda for sustainable development, and the continent has to be at the center of those initiatives. So I think it will certainly enhance that voice.
OK, Fulani. And just briefly, what do you think will come of this? It's clearly a very kind of symbolic move. What do you think is going to come of this in terms of practical issues and practical kind of changes in the way that Africa deals with other countries that are at that top diplomacy table?
I think what it does is it enhances the continent's strategic autonomy. There's a lot of key stakeholders within the G20 that African countries deal with at a bilateral level. And so having them all there at the G20 and having the AU consistently attending these meetings will certainly be important in that regard. I mean, South Africa used to obviously be the only African country in the G20, and it generally consulted with the African Union before these summits. But having the AU at these summits at a formal level certainly ensures that issues like Agenda 2063, which is the continent's development blueprint, will make it on the agenda of the G20.
OK, Philani, thank you very much for your time. Philani Mthembu there. And we'll be speaking a bit later on to our correspondent in Delhi, where that G20 summit is taking place.